It is time for This Week in Doom, my favorite time of the week. We give you the doom, the whole doom, and nothing but the doom. And guys, it was a particularly doomy week, starting with this magnificent photo op that really wasn't so magnificent. I guess when you think about it, an assassin took a shot at President Trump. And by now, if this is the first time you're hearing about this, well, I can't help you. Not going to go too much into what happened here because, I'm still expecting closure from the last big presidential assassination thing. Remember Kennedy? What was that, like 55, 60 years ago now? And I'm expecting closure on that story any day now. And then, shortly after that, I'm sure we'll find out all the details of what just happened in Butler, Pennsylvania last week. So as soon as we solve that whole Kennedy thing, then we'll get around to figuring out just WTF happened in Pennsylvania last week. Moving on from that, we had President Biden following the unfortunate revelation that after that photo op that we just showed you, his chances are not very good at this point, decided he was going to take a shot at national rent control. He pushed the policy of capping rental increases at 5% year over year for corporate landlords only. Anybody owning more than 50 units would be limited to raising the rent by 5% year over year. And of course, if you're trying to create a shortage of something, implementing price controls is the quickest way to do so. So economists pretty much across the board, everybody but Paul Krugman came out and said this was a terrible idea because, well, it is. Moving on, we also had President Biden shortly after announcing the national rent control announced that he had come down with the vid. The president has COVID, further fueling speculation that he would drop out of the race. And here is President Biden just moments after announcing to the press that he had COVID, not wearing a mask and not social distancing on his way to his beach house in Delaware. Also going on this week, we had a couple of interesting policy decisions that came out of both the Biden administration and proposals from Trump that had a direct impact on tech stocks. The first was this story in Bloomberg about the U.S. floating tougher trade rules to rein in the China chip industry. In this case, the Biden administration is threatening to extend export controls against AI chips being sent to China. But the unique proposal here is he's talking about implementing or evoking the foreign direct product rule, which basically says any U.S. origin technology cannot be sold to China, even if it's not manufactured in the U.S. And this is a direct shot at companies like Japan's Tokyo Electron and the Dutch ASML, who manufacture chip technology not within the United States. They manufacture it in Japan and in the Netherlands, and then they export it to China. And yet the U.S. is talking about implementing export controls, which would basically sanction those companies for selling American technology to China. So the United States is taking yet more of a hostile towards trade with China stance here. And of course, this was one of two things that happened on Tuesday morning that really took a dent out of the NASDAQ over the week. The next story that really went after the chip industry was when Donald Trump kind of flippantly mentioned during a campaign speech that he thinks Taiwan should pay the United States for its national defense, which is something of a deviation from the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity, where we never really said what we would or wouldn't do when it came to Taiwan to keep the Chinese guessing. We're kind of throwing that one out here and saying, yeah, our military will come to your aid, but you're going to pay us to do that. And of course, between that and the Biden administration's pledge to extend export controls to European and Japanese companies, it led to one of the biggest sell-offs in tech that we have seen in quite a while. It was actually the worst week for stocks since April. Just to run down a little bit of what we had, the S&P 500 was down 111 points this week. The NASDAQ sold off 672 points, led by those high-flying AI stocks that have been all the rage for the last 2 years or so. Again, those comments from the Biden administration and Trump's comments on Taiwan contributed to that sell-off in AI, which dragged down the entirety of the index. It also caused a little bit of secular rotation with people rotating back into some of the perceived to be safer dividend stocks in the Dow. And so the Dow Jones Industrial Average actually rose by about 266 points on the week. The next story we got this week was China's GDP came in lower than expected. Once again, China's GDP grew by just 4.7% year over year in the last quarter. Now, guys, I would add these are Chinese government statistics. So you always have to take these somewhat with a grain of salt, but you can see here a clear trend of declining GDP growth in China. Now, that 4.7% year over year number, that is lower than the 5.3% we had in the first quarter and well below expectations for a 5.1% increase. China's economy continues to be plagued by the collapse of the property sector, which is causing a slowdown in consumer spending due to the wealth effect, something we've talked about on this channel quite a bit. And China's economy continues to slow. And speaking of things we've been talking about on this channel, it was just last week that our own Melody Wright talked to us about Japan intervening in the Forex market, the yen intervention. And well, it looks like we had even more of that this week. Take a look at this chart of the strength of the Japanese yen as measured in US dollars. What you're looking at here, this is the number of yen it takes to make $1. And of course, this chart has been on the rise pretty much all year as the yen has been collapsing. Now, I would note that in May, we had a very highly publicized intervention by the Japanese finance ministry where they sold US dollars to buy yen and increased the value of the yen. That caused this chart to plummet temporarily. And then, of course, the yen resumed its decline. And then, as Melody talked about last weekend, we had another intervention late last week on Thursday and Friday, shown here with these two big red candles. Again, caused a temporary strengthening in the yen, causing this chart to move lower. And it's believed that on Wednesday, we had another intervention here on this red candle. This is not confirmed, by the way, because the Japanese finance ministry will not come out and admit what they did. But it is believed now that the Japanese have dumped combined over $100 billion in the Forex market to prop up the value of the yen versus the dollar. Again, it's had limited effect. If they don't change the underlying monetary policy, then this chart will continue rising. And you can see immediately following Wednesday, the yen resumed heading, well, this chart resumed heading higher, which was the yen heading lower again. And of course, to wrap up the week, what better way to wrap up a week that began with an attempted presidential assassination than a global internet outage, courtesy of the internet security provider CrowdStrike and their partner Microsoft. CrowdStrike forced out a security update in the middle of the night through Microsoft's Azure system that caused computers across the world to enter an endless reboot loop, resulting in the infamous blue screen of death. It took down airlines, government services, healthcare, banks, you name it. Pretty much everybody was offline at the start of the day. Anybody who had their computer left on overnight, as well as probably millions of individual laptops and workstations across the country. Shout out to our IT guys. You've got your work cut out for you in the coming days. And thus concludes This Week in Doom. And I will turn that back over to Travis and Melody.
Melody, any comments or remarks there?
No, it was a great wrap up.
Yeah,
it was
a
heck of a week. Yeah.
That was a heck of a week. I mean, the thing that, I haven't had time to process everything, I feel like, Jack, but, what are your thoughts on the blue screen and like, Melody, you're going to cover that, so I won't even go there. But, the other thing is that's really kind of interesting is that 5% cap. Can you tell the viewers, Jack, what's wrong with that type of price control from the government and what can happen to actually make rent going up even worse?
So here's the thing. Price is really markets sending information to market participants about the scarcity of something. That's what price is, all right? It's the cost. It's how much of our work we have to pay to get something, but it's information. It tells market participants, if you want to buy this thing, you got to pay up a little more because we're running out of it. And it also tells the people who supply the thing, hey, there's more money in this. Why don't you make more of it? Because we need more of it. When the government comes in and implements price controls, they block that signal. And so the producers of the thing never get the message that we need more. And so the net effect, when you implement price controls, you inevitably end up with a shortage because you take away the incentive to produce more of something. And as we're going to talk about later in the segment on the automotive sector, the solution to higher prices is higher prices, not price controls. Price controls only makes a shortage worse.